draft Contracts for Different Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations 2024.
Minister, would be good enough to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, I beg to move the draft Contract for Difference Miscellaneous Amendment Regulation 2024, which were laid before the House on the 28th of October 2024 to be approved. Now, last week, the Secretary of State updated the House on COP29, and he reiterated what we already knew, that speeding up our transition to clean power is in our national interest. It's the best way to bolster our energy security, getting us off the roller coaster of fossil fuels that we do not control. It's the best way to spark economic growth across the country, with hundreds of thousands of new jobs, particularly in our industrial heartlands. And it's the best way to tackle the climate crisis for today and future generations. This is why this government is running at our Clean Power by 2030 mission. And the instruments today will contribute towards that march. The Contracts for Difference scheme is the government's main mechanism for supporting new low-carbon electricity generation. CFDs are awarded through annual competitive auctions, with the lowest price bids successful. The sixth CFD allocation round, which ran earlier this year, was the largest round ever, and more than double last year's round under the last government. It awarded contracts to 128 clean energy projects across Great Britain, capturing 9.6 gigawatts of renewable capacity and generating enough electricity to power the equivalent of 11 million homes. We must, however, continue to build on this success, and that means continually evolving the Contract for Difference schemes to ensure it reflects the global challenges and opportunities in the renewable sector. Building on AR6, we plan to update the scheme using the instrument to continue our march to clean power by 2030. First, we are proposing to extend the option of phased CFDs to floating offshore wind projects, and secondly, to repower onshore wind projects to apply for CFDs. On the first point, the government has committed to radically increase the UK's offshore wind capacity, including floating offshore wind. As emerging technology with less than 250 megawatts of capacity deployed worldwide, the floating offshore wind construction process is yet to be industrialised. Floating wind projects are likely to have a slower build-out rate, in part for things like capacity in the ports and weather conditions. So phasing in CFD allows projects to build in multiple stages. It allows for greater flexibility in the construction phase, enabling the delivery to more realistic timelines and providing more certainty and confidence to investors. The reduction in project costs, in turn, increases investor confidence in the UK's growing floating offshore wind sector, unlocking the potential for us to massively expand. On the second amendment, enabling repowering for onshore wind, our analysis shows that there is approximately 1 gigawatt of onshore wind coming to an end of its operating life between 2027 and 2030. Repowering can help ensure renewable generation capacity is not lost from older projects. It also provides an opportunity to increase the renewable generation capacity of existing sites through improvements in technology and more efficient use of sites. Enabling access to CFDs for repowered onshore wind projects offers just revenue certainty to those projects in order to maintain and boost our capacity. The CFD scheme previously did not have a policy for repowering built within it. The amendments today ensure that we do this in order to make sure that eligible generation capacity can apply for CFDs. Now, in designing this policy, we are making sure that we are balancing our objectives around decarbonisation, consumer value for money, and security of supply by enabling repowering only for projects which both align with the fundamental aims of our CFD programme, but critically have reached the end of their life and their operating life. Our approach, and the approach that we are taking to everything we do as we make our march to clean power by 2030, will always ensure that we are protecting consumers by intervening only when and where needed, and by making sure that the cost is effective. Before I conclude, let me say a little word about the consultation process, where we sought views and evidence around the changes proposed for allocation round 7. We received a range of responses from across industry, including developers, electricity traders and suppliers, businesses operating in the offshore wind sector, and consumer environmental groups. Most respondents agreed with implementing the phasing of floating offshore and repowering for onshore wind. Respondents also provided inputs into how we can implement these policy in the best way. And the department, as you would expect, will continue to engage with stakeholders in industry. And then let me end here. The instruments today is another important step towards delivering our clean power mission, shielding families from volatile fossil fuel prices that we know have been the cost and the result of the cost of living crisis that we face, and establishing UK as a clean energy superpower. It builds on the existing success of the CFD programme, but allows it to evolve to reflect the realities of the realities of the global market. And critically, we believe that this is a step in order to ensure that we can protect consumers and reduce bills. Thank you.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft contracts for difference, miscellaneous amendments, regulations 2024. Andrew Barry, on behalf of the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. String. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. I would like to firstly welcome the amendments being brought forward today, that this instrument brings to contracts for difference regulations, extending the existing CFD to offshore wind and permitting repowering projects to apply for CFDs. Contracts for difference is a scheme that we on this side of the House are immensely proud of, delivering 29.4 gigawatts of power in 6 rounds of allocation since 2014. Indeed, it was the Conservative government under Lord Cameron of Chipping Barnet that introduced this scheme to combine the power of competition with certainty for investors through the strike price to keep prices low while driving forward low-carbon energy projects. And the consistency and certainty brought by annual licensing rounds that we approved last year is also something that we are proud of. We do, however, have concerns in the direction of travel under the new Secretary of State for energy and, indeed, the new government. Their target for CFDs requires an almost hell-for-leather approach for which consumers and bill payers, we do worry, will shoulder the burden. In the Secretary of State's attempts to rush to 60 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, he would need to secure 28 gigawatts in the next 2 allocation rounds, which is more than in the last 6 rounds combined. This will inevitably require ditching the competitive element of the allocation rounds entirely, and we worry that will push up the strike price. Even The Guardian don't think the Secretary of State's plans are realistic, claiming that his target of having 60 gigawatts of installed offshore wind capacity by 2030 is still a long way from being credible. In the past, reasonable strike price mechanisms have enabled competition whilst encouraging new projects by providing certainty. However, the new ferociously ambitious targets will require a strike price which outstrips the reference price, meaning the consumer is exposed to more of the burden. And industry knows this. The head of offshore development at RWE told a business conference that, and I quote, consumers risk losing out under these plans. We must take very seriously his concerns that the rush to deliver by 2030 would, and I quote again, create very short-term resource constraints, spikes in prices, and that consumers will be the one to bear the brunt. It's no wonder that the government therefore have backed down from their claims of saving households £300 on their energy bills. It's quite clear that this rush for electricity decarbonisation by 2030 will see bills going up and up, and the industry themselves admit this. The signal to the market from the Secretary of State is renewables at any price, that they will pay exorbitant amounts to create this capacity to achieve hugely ambitious political target. We cannot be naive on the economic implications of this political choice. Chair, we do support these amendments today. However, I would like to put on record our concern for the implication of the government's politically motivated rush to the 2030 target, which seems that the Secretary of State will pursue at any cost.
Minister, would you care to respond?
Yes. Let me respond directly to this question of bills. We are as exercised and committed to protecting consumers through this transition to net zero. I say this as the Minister for Energy Consumer. My job is to protect consumers. And look, our judgment is we have seen sky-high energy prices as a result of our dependence on international fossil fuel markets. Families at the moment are suffering the impacts of that reliance. And the way that we break that is that we break the dependence on fossil fuels, we make the transition to clean power. All our analysis suggests that if we get this right, combined with interventions on energy efficiency, upgrading people's homes, that's the way we bear down on bills. The status quo is not tenable. You speak to any consumer, they will tell you the status quo is not tenable. And we have made a strategic bet that if we can run at clean power, if we can break the link with gas, if we can break the dependence on fossil fuel, that's the way in which we bear down on prices. And the NESO put out its publication on clean power and validated this. This will reduce costs in the system, and critically, it will bear down on bills. Consumers at the heart of this transition for us. We are doing this not for ideological reason, but in the end, the status quo of people and energy bills and the affordability of it is not something that we are willing to countenance. It's something that the last government was willing to put up with. We absolutely won't, and that is why we are making the march to clean power by 2030.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft contracts for difference, miscellaneous amendments, regulations 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.